where it is safe and comfortable to do so, we'd love to have you on camera. We do understand that's not always possible. If you're a member of the public, we do ask that you leave your camera off until it's time for public comment. And on that note, we will be having time for public comment at the back half of the meeting at about 4:15, depending on how the conversation goes. We'll have an opportunity for folks to engage in some public comment. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak to this subcommittee, I would just ask that you drop myself or Carrie Steele a note in the chat to let us know sometime between now and 4 p.m. To let us know. And if you're with an organization that you're speaking on behalf of, let us know who that is. On the note of the chat, we do ask that people refrain from using the chat. If there is an urgent matter, you can direct message either myself or Carrie, but use of the chat tends to be distracting for all members, and particularly anyone who is using a screen reader or other technology. And finally, as a reminder, you may hear me calling for members of the public or making other announcements. We not only have this group who is watching live, but this meeting is being streamed on YouTube and will be recorded and broadcast or placed up on the YouTube channel and on Engage Dora. With that, I'm going to go ahead and dive us into today's conversation and move quickly to get us into our panel discussion. Just to touch base, and for those joining for the first time from the public listening, we've spent the last 4 or 5 months really digging into the primary charges of this subcommittee. And those who join every month may be a little tired of hearing me say this, but I'm going to rattle off what it is we're tasked with doing. The purpose of this subcommittee is to study and make recommendations on issues to ensure that all Coloradans with disabilities have access to the services they need, are able to effectively participate in public discussion, are able to be employed by government agencies, and can run for and effectively serve in elected positions across the state of Colorado. In our conversations, we've started off over the last few months brainstorming a lot of what the barriers are, what some of the potential challenges are. In response to some of your requests, we've done our best to bring panelists with either professional or lived experience that they can share with all of you. Today, we're going to continue that with a highlight or the preview that next month we're going to start pivoting. As we go into the summer, we're going to move from just the brainstorming to pulling all of the ideas that have been generated so far and starting to identify what recommendations you all may want to make in each of those categories for accessing government services, for being employed by government agencies or offices, and for running for and serving in office. Today, though, we've got another great panel with some folks whose professional lives have centered around ensuring some of those rights in different levels of government agencies. So I'm going to start off by introducing our panel. I'll ask them a couple of questions, and then we want to open this up to all of the members of this subcommittee. I'm hoping this will be a really lively, engaged, and informative conversation. So after I ask a couple of questions, I'm going to ask the subcommittee members to start layering in with your questions. Let me introduce our panelists, though. Up first, Allison Butler, who's the director of the Division of Disability Rights, Human Rights, and Community Partnerships for the City and County of Denver. I think some of you may know Allison from some of her other work in the state of Colorado, but we're thrilled to have her here. Also joining is Kevin McDaniel, the statewide equity manager for accessibility, and Christina Erickson, policy advisor and partnership liaison for Colorado Disabilities Council and the state of Colorado. So with that, I'm going to ask first Allison as I get everyone spotlighted. Allison, if you would introduce yourself in just 1 second and let people know not only what your current job entails, but really what your connection to the work that we're here to discuss is, because I know it's a lot more than just your current role.
For sure. I'll try to go real fast. My name's Allison Butler. I am currently the director of Denver's Division of Disability Rights. So I work at the City and County of Denver, helping to make sure that all city agencies understand their obligations and hopefully exceed them. In regards to disability rights laws. I also work with the community in that role, but I come from about 20 years of civil rights experience. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've been focusing specifically on disability rights since about, well, specifically only on disability rights since 2007, and broadly since 2003. So I actually found out about the position that I'm currently in because I engaged in a lawsuit together with CCDC and Creek against the city and county of Denver, and said, oh, there's this cool office over in Denver. So I've definitely spent most of my time as an advocate on the outside, and now for the last 2 years, I've been working here at the city of Denver.
Thank you, Allison. Up next, Christina, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, again, with your professional background, but also your broader connection to this issue. And as you do, I also want to mention to the full group, as you know, most of the time we have 2 ASL interpreters. Today we have one carrying that weight, and I've asked, so we may from time to time slow down the conversation just to make sure that she's able to keep up with me, as I tend to speak a little quickly at times. But Christina, if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. My name is
And
Christina Erickson. I am the policy advisor for the Developmental Disabilities Council for the state. I am brand new in this role. I actually was with the Disability Rights Office for the city of Denver for the last 3 years, working with Allison, which was the best. So very, very new in my current position. But I am a disability social worker by training and an ADA specialist. That was my role at the city. I also sit on the outdoor task force for this, or the outdoor subcommittee for this task force, and run a lot of adaptive climbing nonprofit work. And I think that's about it for me in a nutshell.
wonderful, thank you. And I'm told we do now have 2 ASL interpreters, so thank you both for being here with us. Kevin, if you would introduce yourself and give a little background on the work that you lead.
Yes, sir. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin McDaniel, and I am the Statewide Equity Office's Accessibility Manager, Statewide Accessibility Manager, and Statewide ADA Coordinator. And my role is to, as both the Statewide ADA Coordinator and DPA's ADA Coordinator, also the Accessibility Manager. So my job is to train all of the ADA coordinators in the state, and then provide guidance on compliance for statewide issues. I've worked in disability rights and advocacy and accessibility pretty much my entire professional career since I left college. I dedicated to this work. I have a daughter with a disability, and I have many members of my family with autism. And so I've been passionate about this since college. So happy to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. And since each of you have such unique positions, I'm going to be tailoring my questions, but I'd also really invite you to share what you think this group most needs to know. Allison, one of the big topics we've been discussing is what it looks like to apply for and go to work for a government agency. And I'd love to hear what you've seen as both some of the challenges and some of the effective ways that some government agencies have sought to overcome those challenges or help individuals ensure that they do have that equal access to employment.
Sure. So, I mean, I think on the positive side, I think, well, the state, right, has somewhat of a disability preference, but even just saying people with disabilities or people with lived experience invited specifically to apply, I think looking at what the job requirements are and being very serious about, do you need to have a master's, or what if you had an associate's and some lived experience as a person with a disability? I think I've seen agencies do those kinds of things, and I think those are very helpful. Looking at just sort of, like I said, everything that you're requiring of somebody. Where is your meeting going to be? Are you requiring somebody to come in person? Are you allowing it to be virtual? Are you being really upfront when you're asking somebody about an interview or putting your job announcement out, that you're going to make accommodations? We know that's the law. It's different if that's actually done. So I think there's a lot of positive practices. I will say that I've also seen people sort of misunderstand things and maybe trying to be overly accommodating in ways that people don't need. And one example I have is a city agency was interviewing a blind candidate, and they were doing an assessment, and like a written problem kind of, and they said, okay, well, we gave the candidate the twice as long to complete it. I said, oh, okay, did they ask for that? No. Okay, well, why'd you give it to them? Well, because they're blind. Like, okay, are we really like now telling all hiring managers that blind people take twice as long to complete work? So I think that you just need to make sure that you have somebody who not only understands the law, but maybe has a little bit of practical common sense. Also, looking at many of all the practices, what you're putting out from the moment you put the job announcement out all the way through the interview.
Thank you, Allison. Christina, I want to pick up on where Allison was. And as you know from some of the other subcommittees, the recommendations that will come from this group may be regulatory or legislative types of rules that should be in place. They may be best practices that different agencies should employ. They may also just be opportunities for better public awareness and education. And I'm curious from your experience, how many of the challenges and barriers stem from people not following existing rules? How much of it is a lack of awareness? And how much of it is we need to really redefine the rules by which we operate? And I know that's a broad question, so I'll invite you to enter it at any point and share your thoughts.
That is a very broad question. I'm trying to decide where to start. I think just to really echo off of Allison, because she said it so well, of making sure that you're like, look at your requirements, look at what are you asking, what are you offering, making sure that it's accessible. I think it's one thing to be ADA compliant, but ADA compliance does not mean accessible. It just means maybe you opened the door a little bit. It doesn't mean that people are welcome at the table. And that's a very different conversation. And I think making it well known up front, like, hey, the space is accessible. Hey, like if you need anything, ask a question. This is where you can ask a question. If you need anything at all, like give us a call. Opening that door and just making people feel welcome, I think is the biggest step. Because no two accommodations are going to be the same. No two people are the same. And especially with folks with disabilities, like we can't ever assume, as Allison was saying, like assumptions go horribly wrong most of the time, I think, in accommodation world. And we can't do that. We can't rely on that. So I think just giving people the space and the comfort to ask what they need is huge. The first time I ever asked for an accommodation, I lived with anxiety and depression. I've asked for job accommodations, and the first time I ever did it, I was an intern with the city of New York, and I had no idea I could ask for an accommodation as an intern. Nobody had told me. I just happened to work for a civil rights lawyer who was like, yeah, honey, you can ask for this. And I was like, oh, that's great. Like, didn't know that. And so from everything from your higher up hires to your interns, like just put the invite out. I don't know if that really answered your question, Barrick, but that's always my biggest soapbox in accommodation.
Christina, that was fantastic and a great entry into this. I want to give our ASL interpreters an opportunity to swap out. I think Jody will be coming in, and Rebecca, we're going to give you a quick break. And I'm going to ask Carrie to highlight Jody when she gets her camera on. Kevin, I'm going to go to you next. And I'm curious your perspective from a statewide government lens. We're talking a lot about the challenges that individuals confront when seeking employment or when being employed by a government agency. We've noted that it's also important to understand what the challenges are for the government agencies so that whatever rules or recommendations or best practices this group puts forward can help address those. And I'm curious about your experience with different state agencies, what challenges you've seen them confront and need to overcome, whether in rule, in practice, or the culture of their office in ensuring that they're meeting those accommodation needs.
Well, I think that it's, through all agencies, city, county, state, I think that in all private businesses as well, I think the challenge is just a fear of the unknown, folks not understanding what accommodations are, what their responsibilities are, what the applicant's responsibilities are, and not kind of understanding that everybody has. I don't know how deep we go here, but I think that it's the real problem is that the view of the medical model of disability, really, in the sense that people think that providing a job in general means that it's like a favor and not, just someone's right to pursue employment. And I think that one of the things that we're doing here at the state to address that, and I'm not picking any state agency, of course, I'm pulling more from my experience in the past in Florida, is we have launched a statewide accommodation fund that is intended to help agency leadership and hiring managers to just kind of overcome any apprehension towards hiring someone who would require accommodation. Of course, we all know it's illegal to do that. But what we're trying to tackle is that the bias that happens in all people. It's not something that I personally, having done this for 17 years, don't think that anyone is trying to prevent any individual, particularly from getting out. I mean, I think, by and large, it's folks just not knowing, and it's an ignorance to what the reality of the situation is. And so what we're doing here is, again, using our accommodation fund to leverage that and to provide hiring managers the ability to kind of look beyond that. We say, not only are we going to provide you the assistance, but we also have this, we have this fund that's going to pay for these accommodations, and we're going to work with you and try to help you navigate this. So I hope that answers your question. I'm trying to be very concise here.
I appreciate it. And please know, when I ask questions, it's based on information or discussions we've had. You all also are the subject matter experts. So you may have better answers than I have questions. So I invite that all of the time. Allison, I'm going to go to you next. And talking about, Kevin mentioned hiring managers. And I'd love to hear from you if you could wave a magic wand. We know most people want to do the right things. At times, people are limited by what they are told they must do or they can do. Is there anything that you think, if you could wave that magic wand, would give more support to hiring managers and drive more equitable pathways to employment if we had different expectations, whether that's in law or rule or state policies? What would help hiring managers to do the best work to make everything from job announcements to applications and interviews, onboarding and accommodations across the board more universal?
Well, I guess two things are coming to mind. Let me write them down. One is training, right? And so I think that at large organizations like cities, we tend to train some people. We train the very top, or we train the side person who does EDI work or something, but we don't necessarily train the hiring managers into what they can do, what they must do, what they should do. And I think with the benefit of some of that information, a lot of things could look different. Another thing that I think is really important is money. And even though we know that most accommodations are free or very low cost, there's a fear of how much our accommodation's going to cost. And, I know at the City and County of Denver, it's on your agency. And so you are told, if you hire a person with a disability and they need accommodations, that's something you're going to have to pay for. And I think the way that message is delivered, leaves a little to be desired, right? In the way that, okay, so it's coming down to two people. I've got a really tight budget. They're both good. One, I'm going to have to pay for accommodations for them out of my budget that I don't have that money for, and one I don't, right? I think that puts a false choice on people. And, the law says that we have to make these accommodations. And I think that maybe we shouldn't make it so, feel so individualized to hiring managers.
Thank you, Allison. And members of the subcommittee, I'm going to finish up with one more question for each Christina and Kevin, and then I'm going to invite the subcommittee members to join this conversation with your questions. So I'm giving you a minute or two to start thinking about your questions or answers there. Christina, I want to bring you in. We're looking at a pretty long cycle from the minute someone starts to put together a job description for a new position to when and how they post that, how they take applications, how the interviews go, when or if questions of accommodations are asked, and that's just leading to a potential job offer. Then we've got the offer and any considerations for accommodations. I'd love your thoughts on, are there one or two points along that continuum that you've seen there be a particular pain point where we're not necessarily getting it right at the state or local government level, and we really need to make sure we're putting attention to ensure these jobs are accessible to all Coloradans?
That's a great question. I can speak more to that as both somebody who's worked in employment support as a social worker, as well as somebody who's asked for accommodations. To be honest, I haven't hired too many people. But I think a huge hiccup is again, we follow ADA compliance, especially in government agencies. We'll list accommodations or any kind of language about accommodations like once in the process. Like you submit your application, it's like, check the box, are you disabled? Do you need an accommodation? And for a lot of people, that's kind of it. That's like your last space to stake your claim in the accommodation request. And I really believe that it needs to be a part of every step of that process, right? Like list out your accommodations. If it's an in-person interview, like, hey, like, the elevator's a little funky. Like you might want to, we can move over here if you need to. Like little conversations like that in and of itself is an accommodation conversation. And I love that. I think we need to reframe accommodation and disability support outside of the lens of the ADA. We do that a lot in government world of like, it's the ADA or nothing. And so much of disability rights and disability support and how we can just work with folks with disabilities and make them feel included, we need to kind of leave the ADA, like that's square one. We need to look beyond that. And so I think just giving people the space to ask for an accommodation every step of the way, or to, just even giving out your contact information or the contact information of your hiring officer and saying like, hey, like shoot us an email if you need something else along this process, or if there's something, in your job description that maybe is like a real sticking point here. I know when I got hired with the city, for example, it was a requirement that I know how to drive a car. And I can drive a car, but I flagged that and I got hired of like, it's not actually needed for this position to drive a car. And that limits a lot of people from applying for this job that they're probably really qualified for. So little things like that. Yeah.
I appreciate the point that the little things actually do add up and matter quite a bit. Kevin, I've asked a lot of questions about what we're doing wrong and where the problem points are. I'm curious your thoughts. Where have we made shifts recently that are for the better, and that maybe we should look at those as something to build upon, to replicate, to scale, or to model into other aspects of ensuring access across the whole continuum of government services?
Well, thank you for that question. If anybody here has been on any of the conversations I've been, any meetings I've been in, or any presentations I've been in, they'll know what a huge fan I am of maturity models. What I've learned about doing this work is that it's about more than compliance, as Christina and Allison have said. It's really about a culture of customer service. That's essentially what we're talking about here. It's the spirit of the ADA is accommodation. And so, and many other things, of course. But, one of the things that we've done here at the statewide equity office is we've adopted a statewide access maturity model, which essentially the way the maturity model works is it matures an organization in stages. So from a undefined stage to an optimized stage, you would take something like, how good are we at hiring persons with disabilities? Well, in the undefined stage, we don't know how good we are. We haven't done any type of self-assessment. We haven't done any type of survey. We've made no policy effort whatsoever. In the optimized stage, in the higher level of that maturity model, we're going to be the best practice. We're doing presentations. Other agencies are duplicating the things that we're doing. And so one of the things that the statewide equity office has done in the last year is adopt a statewide model in which we are training all of our ADA coordinators across all state agencies on. Each year, we're moving dimension through dimension. And one of the great things about this model is it forces organizations who use it to not only make the policy changes, but also to develop the monitoring and evaluation procedures that are necessary to ensure that you're making this continuous improvement. And continuous improvement is what pushes culture. And so I think that's one of the things that we're doing right. I think that the establishment of our office was an incredible first step. And I think that some of the other things that we're doing right are developing the frameworks, the framework that is needed to be duplicated in other agencies statewide. And we are focusing on maturity models to do that so that we can focus on culture. We want to make not just incremental changes, but sustainable and lasting changes that provide continuity across the agency.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jody and Rebecca, do we need to swap out, give you a rest? On the interpretation side, did you want to swap out? Okay, let's we'll get Rebecca in here. Craig Towler, I see your hand up, so I'm going to get you in with the first question.
Hi, everyone. This is Craig. Thank you for being here and sharing so much great info with us. As everybody was speaking, and this will just be a question for everyone instead of one person directly, but I heard a lot of people talk about the need of more education and improved culture. So I was curious if there has ever been any type of disability etiquette training that's been required for any staff or hiring members. And if not, do you think that would be something valuable that could be added to help kind of understand the importance of lived experience and really understand people with disabilities? And the only way to do that is through learning more about the communities through these types of trainings.
Thank you, Craig. And I'm seeing a few nodding heads. Christina, I'm going to go to you first, and then Allison, and then Kevin. And I see some other hands up. Councilman Hines, I'll get to you after this, and then Shannon to you.
I'm going to let Allison speak to a lot of my experience with the city on that, because we have the same thoughts, opinions on that. But yeah, there have been efforts, at least on the, I can speak to the city of Denver level. There have been efforts to have training videos and required training videos. When I got hired at the city of Denver, it was very much like you sit and watch this video and we're going to learn all about the ADA today. But it was like a 3-hour video that you watched with line of 12 other 3-hour videos. And by the time you got to the ADA training, your eyes were just glazed over and you like in one ear out the other. And I'm an ADA specialist and I felt that. So I think there needs to be a serious revamp of how we're doing education trainings. Allison's office at the city of Denver is personally taking on a lot of that, but there are 10,000 employees at the city of Denver. Like that's taking on a lot of in-person trainings and more, one-on-one conversation based type trainings. I think just also, and that's a great question, Craig. And I think also in this conversation, it's really important to note something that I personally get a little frustrated with is that a lot of ADA coordinators or folks that, are the ADA person for their office, they're voluntold to do that. And the ADA is a beast of a law. So if you're not an ADA specialist and all of a sudden you're like told by your boss, like you're the ADA person now, you're probably going to just get the highlights, right? Like you're going to go through and learn like, what do I have to do and what don't I have to do? And I think that's a lot of our response in government accommodation work comes from that as well of like, yes, these folks have training, but at the end of the day, they're like pulling the highlights of the do's and don'ts, which is a little unfortunate in terms of full inclusion. Hopefully that answered that.
It does. Allison, anything you want to layer in?
Yeah, for sure. So I echo Christina, and in my multiple roles that I've had in the disability world, a lot of times people have disability training when they're required to, when they've been sued, when they're in a settlement, something like that. That was how we ended up at the City and County of Denver as part of a settlement, a 3-hour sort of very difficult to get through training. I know y'all are looking at recommendations. I think having required training for city employees on disability etiquette is fantastic. Our office with Christina created a 30-minute one. And what I really loved about it is it's still not required. We're working on it. Is that we used people with disabilities in the video. right? So as opposed to, and I live with metastatic breast cancer as well as anxiety, but it's rather than me saying, here's how you interact with somebody who's deaf, we used a deaf person to say, here's how you interact with somebody who's deaf. We use somebody who uses a service animal, somebody who's blind. So I think having maybe just always having required trainings and not waiting for a city or a state to be sued and then having them could be a great part of a recommendation as well. And I don't know that it would be a recommendation, but I think a best practice would be to include the people with disabilities in your training.
Thank you, Allison. Kevin, any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yes, sir. I just I would just echo what Christina and Allison said. I completely agree. Obviously, we want to make sure nothing about us without us. We want to make sure that we're incorporating lived experience and people who can add value and insight to the conversation, because that's who it's about. I think the one thing from a policy standpoint that would be helpful in terms of the conversation I was having a moment ago about maturity models would be a focus on role-based training that's specific to individuals and their responsibilities within the organization. I think one thing we've all learned with digital accessibility is that everyone has a responsibility to ensure that the content they put out and the services that they provide are accessible. However, not everybody is going to understand the ADA or any accessibility or public right-of-way rules or laws or standards in the same way, because they're not required to. And so I think that making sure that we have role-based training that's packaged and modular and specific to individual roles, so that we can take bite-sized chunks out of this and start to improve our workforce's ability to understand and work with and improve access to persons with disabilities would be helpful.
Thank you, Kevin. Councilman Hines, I'm going to bring you in next. I'm also going to tell everyone we've been highlighting our panelists, and now as members ask questions, highlighting them. I'm going to go ahead and go to full screen so all of the committee members can see one another as we engage in this conversation. But Councilman Hines, if you'd like to jump in with your question.
Yeah, so I'm not sure this is a question. Maybe this is a start to see if people have, our panelists have thoughts on my thoughts. The first is ADA is the legal minimum. It is for the people who couldn't care less about access for people with disabilities. And so the people who care about the disability community, we would hope would go above and beyond. ADA is a remedy, and or it is a mechanism that is meant to be, or to create a remedy. And so, we have a bill going through the General Assembly, right? I'm at the city level, but the state level, there's a bill going through the General Assembly right now that could create additional protections for people with disabilities. We're getting a lot of pushback from the business community, and that's part of the reason why we need more legislators who have lived experience, and we need more allies to protect those legislators. So that's thought number one. And then the thought number two is kind of specific to Denver. One of the things that we've both done right and wrong related to access for people with disabilities is getting an understanding of what we don't know. So one example of what we've done right, so Allison has worked on this. We have done a comprehensive survey of all of our city buildings and the accessibility of the city buildings. And that could be something that that other cities do, or other, frankly, any entity, corporate entity, or whatever. And so we have identified of our hundreds of buildings, which all the deficiencies as far as accessibility for people with disabilities. But then we've taken a stab at prioritizing those improvements, so that we've got a game plan moving forward to what should be tackled when. ADA is 33 years old. I mean, so there's no, the people who are making financial excuses. I mean, it's been around for a long time. So surveying, building, creating a comprehensive survey is one thing that the city's done right. In the same vein of knowing what we don't know, our city auditor, Tim O'Brien, did an audit of Denver's approach to parking for people with disabilities. And in August of 2016, he said Denver has no approach to parking for people with disabilities and asked the city to, or said that the city has, how do you know if the city is compliant with the ADA minimum of having 2% of spaces designed, constructed, of parking spaces designed, constructed, and maintained for people with disabilities? If you don't even know where the spaces are or where the parking lots are. So one of the audit recommendations that the auditor had was that the city should create a comprehensive list of all the parking lots and parking spaces, particularly accessible spaces for people with disabilities. And the city of Denver at the time said yes. The auditor had an update in October of 2018, and the audit update was update, no update. There was no comprehensive list, and as of today, there is no comprehensive list. So so we have obligations, and maybe that we could partner with private entities as they own parking lots. But so I see that as an example of one thing that we've done right, creating a survey of city buildings so that we know what we know now, or we know what we need to do to work on it. And then another opportunity that maybe could use some more gussing up. And I don't see that, for what it's worth. I don't see that as the obligation of the Office of Disability Rights necessarily. But that was something that the city said it was going to do, and it's almost 10 years later, and we don't have it. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilman. And Shannon, I'm going to go to you next, but first I want to see if any of our panelists wanted to react to that.
Sure, I'll add a little bit. This is Allison. First of all, our office motto is to compliance and beyond. Councilmember Hines knows that. I think that is just common, right? We need to know as a city or state what the compliance level is, because we just need to understand that to be appropriate legally. I'm a lawyer, but we need to go beyond it, right? We're coming up to 34 years, and I think that that shouldn't be what we are striving for. We do have, actually right now, we have somebody in from Chicago who's helping us work on our updated transition plan. The ADA required every city and state to have a transition plan, which was an identification of all the physical barriers that exist, and when you're going to fix them and how you're going to go about that and who's responsible. And we're updating that. The ADA doesn't say when it has to be updated or if it has to be done again, or if you did it in 1992, that was good enough. So I do think that's potentially something y'all could consider for state legislation as well, is having to have an updated transition plan now, because I think that's a great point. And Denver is working on that right now.
Thank you, Allison. Shannon, let me get you in with your question.
Hi, yes. So this is Shannon, and I wanted to ask a question. I know about the system and the accommodations provided need a lot of improvement, but I'm more concerned about bias and the situation that's happening with that, with HR and hiring managers and people who are involved in that process, especially the first time they communicate with a person who has a disability. There's already that inherent bias in there. So how are we thinking about dealing with that?
Who wants to jump in from the panel, or who's going to let me call on them? Kevin, I picked on Allison last. I'm going to pick on you this time.
I am sitting here trying to hit unmute, and I'm hitting hit. What's happening here? Yeah. So I completely agree with you. I think that's 100%, almost 100%, what the issues are. Essentially, is bias, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. I don't want to have another snafu where I go into mirror neuron conversations and all this other stuff. But I think that there is I think that the bias is primarily the issue. Anytime that you can get a hiring manager on the floor at a job fair, involved in any way, I've had to drag them to job fairs before. I've had them cancel on me on the subway. And I've had to say things like, if you're not there, I'm going to leave your company sign on the front table, so everybody knows this is where you were supposed to sit. We get them there, we push them there. They hire 10 people, because they get the opportunity to meet the person face to face and actually understand, hey, there's value here. There's a person here. And I go back to that medical model. Everyone assumes that because a person has a disability, it means that they can't contribute in the same way. But I would argue that they have, in many cases, not only the same abilities, but more abilities. I'll give a perfect example of that. I hate using buzzwords without any type of example. We had a organization back in Jacksonville that had participated in one of our job fairs. And this was a mail processing plant, meaning not processing plant, a mail processing center, whatever you want to call it. So essentially, they're taking processed mail and they're running it through a machine all day for the U.S. government. They go to participate in one of our job fairs. They become a preferred employer with our independent center in partnership with the city there. And the first time they bring somebody on, it happened to be a deaf individual. They hit the panic button because their first thoughts were, okay, how do we pay for this? How can we have an interpreter here? How can we handle effective communication between this employee and other employees? I have to give all the credit where credit is due. The director of the independence there, Tyler Morris, leading the charge there, again, in partnership with our office, but this was his fight. To went back to that organization and said, well, let's go a little bit deeper and see how we can partner people together and see what this looks like. So he convinced the organization to hire another individual who was deaf. Fast forward 6 months later, this organization hired 21 deaf individuals. The reason why is because they found out while these individuals were working on the floor. So in this plant, there's a lot of noise, a lot of things happening. And so about every 15 minutes, they have to go turn these machines off. Because they have to go oil the machines, they've got to stop and take a break. And so they got to stop the machine, stops production, stops everything. They start realizing that these individuals who are deaf don't have to stop every 15 minutes to go stop and go huddle over here and talk about these machines. They're communicating in real time. So this is a company who has identified a unique ability of an individual with a disability rather than look at the person as this is a medical situation. I have to find this accommodation. What a burden on me. No, instead, they found their superpower. And so I think that helping hiring managers understand that everybody has something unique to bring to the table is the first step. And, of course, removing bias, it requires awareness training, fostering a culture of access. And to do that, you have to identify champions. You have to give them roles and responsibilities. You have to give them things that they can win on. So you have to scope things out and identify who can make improvements in their corner of the world, and how can you make them a champion to help you remove bias in that agency, that department, division, or office.
Thank you, Kevin. Panelists, I'm going to move us on to the next question, although I'll invite you to continue adding additional thoughts if you'd like. Chanda, let me go to you.
Thank you so much. This is Chanda. I appreciate everyone that's here on the panel. You guys have such wealth of knowledge and background, and just appreciative for everything that you've done. I just made a note here about what I wanted to. I love all the things that already have been said. I know that there's some required training that we had discussed. I know there's some initiatives. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask is if anyone on the panel would be willing to share with us language on where you're seeing your current, whether collaborative or separate initiatives currently live, the language of that, some of the barriers you're running into, and how can the Disability Rights Task Force actually be in support of what it is that you're trying to do? Because I think that's the primary purpose of why we're here. And so I think if we could get that material and information from us, that will give us the very concrete, specific information that we would need in order to be supportive of any initiatives that your separate entities are working on. And I'm sure there's collaborative pieces to it. That's one question or comment. The second was, I am curious if anyone from this panel might also be appropriate for other discussions, which I'll leave up to the facilitators on access to government services at a later meeting. Thank you so much.
Panelists, anyone want to lean in? Christina, I see a smile or a shrug. I'm not sure.
I really don't have a concrete answer, which is, I guess, an answer in and of itself. It's like, I don't have materials to share. So.
Fair enough.
Barrick, I would be happy to in a offline if you'd like. I have presentations prepared. I'm happy to share with anyone what we're doing with our maturity model and how we're trying to leverage agency participation to improve the statewide scores and accessibility across multiple dimensions. We are keeping metrics in our office, but we are in the first year. So if that's ever useful to you at some point, I'm happy to share.
Kevin, I will follow up with you on that. We would love to get those presentations and share it out with the group. And I'll coordinate with you on how broadly we can share that. Rob Hernandez, I'm going to get to you in just 1 second. We have someone who I'm hoping is going to join us on a future panel as well. But Sandra Sharp from CDLE is on. And Sandra, I know you were looking to weigh in on some of the questions being asked. So let me bring you in, and then I'm going to go to Rob Hernandez for a question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I won't go into the details of my role in that, since I will be coming back later for a more in-depth conversation. But I do work for CDLE DVR as the state as a model employer development specialist, which means I lead state agencies in the recruitment hiring of individuals with disabilities. And I did want to mention that so there was a question regarding bias, which is huge. And I just wanted to share the one thing that I've done, especially for the deaf and hard of hearing community, is I send out different educational blasts. And one of them was on the difference between an LSA interpreter and having closed captioning, because a lot of people really didn't understand why closed captioning was good enough. And then I've also sent up educational blasts on how when someone who uses ASL is sending an email, their grammar may not be incorrect as it may appear to someone else. It's very correct, but it's based on ASL grammatical standards. And so I do send those blasts out, and I'm always interested in other blasts that I can send, because I think that information is very, very valuable. And then we do quite a bit in my department on disability etiquette trainings. And we promote those trainings. And right now this year we have a new training, and it's actually a year-long training, 3 sessions, 2.5 hours each session. And we're constantly updating those disability etiquette trainings as appropriate etiquette changes. So those were just the 2 comments that I had heard that I wanted to respond to. So thank you very much. And I appreciate so much everyone here.
Thank you, Sandra. Mr. Hernandez, let me get you in here with a question for our panelists.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Hernandez, ADA, not ADA, Office of Accessibility Manager, managing Title II and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So I have a question here for the panel, and I have my own, I guess you could say, recommendation, and I've shared it with our committee. What would you say the best way to approach in putting ADA in the forefront? And so here we are 33 years later, like Council Member Hines said, we're 33 years later. And we're still trying to get everybody on board to, hey, you're supposed to be doing this because it's the right thing to do. You need to avoid lawsuits. You don't want a DOJ settlement. If you were to put a program, a process together, what would you say that would be?
And on this one, I'm going to call on all three of you. Allison, you get the misfortune of being first in my screen. So Allison, I'm going to call on you, and then Kevin, and then Christina.
Sure. So, and hi, Rob. So just tell me a little bit more what you mean. What would our program or process be to try to convince people that, like, people within our
Right.
agency? Is that what you mean?
Especially being in a municipality role, right? We have to deal with our leadership. In our roles, we have to deal with our leadership. And how do we convince leadership and, well, the municipality in general that this is what we should be doing and this is how we should be doing it, you know, in accordance with the ADA.
Sure. So, I don't know. I have so many thoughts, and I'm really trying to make them like streamlined. I guess I think about like the curb cut effect, right? Where we have curb cuts so that people who use wheelchairs can get onto the sidewalks, and actually then we all like it. And people who are pushing strollers and in all different scenarios, curb cuts help everybody. So I think trying to show, number one, that this can help lots of different people, and the benefits. I mean, they did this with education, right? So when we brought kids from segregated schools into mainstream schools, we didn't just say this is good for the kids with disabilities. We said this is actually good for the kids without disabilities who are now having kids with disabilities in their classroom, and what are the benefits to them. So I think trying to show that there are more benefits to all people, whether you have a disability or not, when we have people with disabilities included in our workplace. I think that's number one. And I think the other is to try to, I mean, I know that we've said this a million times, but really destigmatize disability. As Christina mentioned, we have 14,000 employees in the city and county of Denver. Statistically, we have 4,000 who have disabilities, or 3,000 at least who have disabilities. And we don't have any sort of disability employees association, or we don't have any sort of loud and proud, I have disabilities. And I think if we understood more that it's not like, oh, well, here we're working on issues for those employees with disabilities, those few employees. It's like, nope, I have a disability. You have a disability. The person you're working with, they may have a disability as well. And just showing that this really impacts a lot of people within the government, and whether or not you have a disability, that there's likely going to be positive outcomes. I think that's sort of a carrot way to approach that.
Thank you.
Kevin or Christina, thoughts?
Good. Yes, sir. Sorry, I was on the mute again. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is infrastructure. Infrastructure means ADA coordinators. It means having conducted self-evaluations. You said, Rob, something about being able to convince leadership is the right thing to do. And while I agree with everything that everybody has said here, I guess I take a more practical. It's more of just a lessons learned approach. For me, the first step is identifying where our risks are, where you can't do that without conducting a self-evaluation. Then it's about demonstrating to leadership that these are things that have been required to have been done. And each day we don't correct the issue, we're creating more work. And we have a fiduciary duty not only to the taxpayers, but also to our employees. And there's consequences for not getting things right the first time. And so I think that the most immediate thing that you need is ADA coordinators who are trained not only just to inspect buildings, but also to review programs, policies, procedures, to make sales, to be able to demonstrate to leadership, what does your matrix look like? What are the priorities? Where are the risks? Where are our customers? Where are the barriers? Where do they exist? Where our customers need access the most? What are we prioritizing? And for that, you need a self-evaluation. You have to conduct a self-evaluation to get to that point. And so that's why I mentioned earlier about our maturity model. The state has essentially either a Title I or a Title II ADA coordinator in every agency. And so what our office is doing in not having that infrastructure all completely built yet, we are we're trying to identify how we can find inspectors and folks to help us look through our buildings. But in the interim, we still have a plan. We're training on the back of our maturity model and trying to prepare our ADA coordinators to help us start building that infrastructure to conduct those self-evaluations. But I think that the main issue is infrastructure, and for that you need folks who understand the ADA.
Thank you, Kevin. Christina, I'm going to get you in here, and then Shannon, I'm going to go to you for a question next.
Great. My answer was actually really similar to Kevin, and I fall right in line with Allison as well. I think that it cannot be said enough that having people on your team who are maybe not like a disability advocate, but who really get why accessibility is important, and like Allison said, that can go just a little bit above and beyond the basics of the ADA. The ADA is the floor, it is not the ceiling. And for whatever reason, we're still shooting for it. Like, it is older than I am, y'all. And I had enough time to grow up and get a career in this. Like, this is outrageous. So yeah, like having people who can look beyond that, I think is huge. And then just to go back to your question, Rob, and really pulling from what Allison was saying, reminding people that disability is a really normal part of life is honestly where I start most of my trainings. Like, I always start my disability trainings or my ADA trainings by just having the room say the word disability. Kind of going back to Shannon's question about bias earlier, people are afraid of disability. If you're not having conversations about it, or if you're not involved in the disability community, it is a scary thing for so many people. And bias comes out of fear. Lack of, comprehensive, equitable programming comes out of fear or just not wanting to learn. But we all know and love somebody with a disability. Statistically, it's just true. It's the one marginalized group that any of us get to jump into, and we probably will as we age. Like, just normalizing the conversation of disability goes so far. And I think that's always a great starting point.
Yeah,
Thank you, Christina.
I appreciate your answers. I think they were great responses. I agree. Kevin, you talked about an infrastructure. You have to have people that are knowledgeable to educate and explain the process so they can understand, why it's important. And then Allison and Christina, I like the way how you brought in the disability part. There are so many of us that have even invisible disabilities and can relate to that. And if you can harness that, I think that promotes a better program all around. So I think all three answers were great, and appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for the question. Shannon, to you for a question for our panelists.
Yep, so it's Shannon again. And I was just wondering about your perspective. Let's say if you had two separate people, and they both have disabilities. One, contacts you, asks for accommodations for the process, and the other person just shows up and tries to do their best through that process. They didn't cost you any money, but they didn't ask for these accommodations while the other person did to go through the process. Or maybe they use their own accommodations. So how do you respond to those people, especially the person who doesn't request? Like, what's the approach to that? Like, is that an approach that someone takes that you would consider to be the wrong approach when looking for a job, or is there something you would do if that happens?
I'm going to have all three of our panelists weigh in. And Christina, I'm glad you raised your hand because you were going to get called on. I'm going to go to Christina and then Allison and Kevin and ask each of you to respond to Shannon's question.
Yeah, thanks, Barrett. Yeah, Shannon, that's a great question. I don't think either of those versions of approach to a job interview or an application is wrong at all. So many people with disabilities do not list that they have a disability on their job applications because they're afraid of that bias. They're afraid of that kickback, and they would rather just like struggle bust their way through it than have to openly say, like, I have a disability, out of fear for not even making the basic cut, right? Like, I never see it as wrong that somebody was afraid to ask for accommodation, right? And that's kind of what I was saying earlier in our initial round of questions, which is if you are just upfront and make accommodation like a part of every step of the process and make it comfortable for people to ask, instead of just, one checkbox early on in the process and then never again. I really hope that we would eliminate situations like that from ever happening. But if I was on a hiring panel and somebody did come in and, maybe I'm assuming they could use an accommodation, I would probably wait till they ask. I never want to assume, but also just like offering up a contact information, right? Like shoot me a text, shoot me an email. Like you don't have to ask now. But yeah.
Let me go to Allison and then Kevin, and then Craig, you're going to get the last question for our panel.
Sure. And so, Shannon, I also wouldn't ever want to say that it's wrong that a person brings their own accommodation, or like brings their own interpreter. It's not wrong on that person, but it's definitely wrong on us, right? If somebody feels like they need to bring their own accommodation rather than asking for it, which it's required by law, there's obviously something that has gone very, very wrong. And I would never want that person to then be in a situation where they think they can't be accommodated in their job, right? I mean, the job interview is one tiny piece of a job. So I would hope that any agency, of course, Denver for me, is making sure that people would never feel like they have to do that. And that, as Christina said, and as we've mentioned, that it would be very clear throughout the process that that's not something you have to do and that you absolutely can seek an accommodation. But I'm not going to fault the person who was worried about it, just like Christina said.
I guess I totally agree with Christina and Allison. I guess the only thing I'd add is just maybe just to try to go a little bit deeper there in maybe just a little bit of a different perspective. First, I would say that obviously, as Allison said, having someone pay for their interpreter, we would never do that. The state would never ask somebody to pay for their interpreter. By policy, they shouldn't. As a baseline, there needs to be an understanding that that of course we're going to pay for the accommodations. We need to make sure that the hiring process is not filtering through folks before we're making hiring decisions. I think that's one thing that I've observed over the last 17 years is working on employee hiring panels and stuff like that. Everybody has different ways they hire people. Some folks, I even saw back in Florida, there was one agency that wanted to use an application that basically it was like a swipe. You can swipe through and look at the individual, which was, ridiculous, of course. I think that making sure that we're removing barriers on the hiring side. And then, as you said, it shouldn't be something that's uncomfortable. The ADA actually, if the need for accommodation is obvious, we shouldn't even be asking. We should just be making the accommodation. But I would say that the reality of it is that, as I would tell all ADA coordinators, you have to build resilience to rejection. As an advocate as well, and someone who has worked in the independent living movement somewhat. My mentor was an independent living champion in Florida. I would argue that we want to encourage our residents, not on the basis of not on behalf of the state, just me as an advocate saying this, encourage our residents to understand that what their rights are. And also in some ways what some responsibilities are, because if it's not obvious, we do want people to be able to ask for an accommodation. And so that's where it's on us to make sure that we're removing barriers and it's not uncomfortable for someone to ask for an accommodation. And I think that's where a lot of our work takes place, is that awareness, removing bias, that, as I said earlier, the role-based training, making sure that the right people have the right training, so that they're prepared and they're not surprised when they encounter something they haven't had to encounter before. A lot of hiring managers have never even had to provide an accommodation. So for them, it's a brand new thing, and new things are always scary.
Thanks, Kevin. Craig, I'm going to go to you for a question, and then Chanda, I am going to come back to you because I want to make sure that we address your question, which I think is about pending legislation. So I want to given that we're in the final days, I want to make sure we cover that. But Craig, let me get to your question first.
Hi, everyone. This is Craig. Mine is kind of a follow-up. We've been talking a lot about individuals at kind of during the hiring process and interviews and that role, but I'm curious about before that, what steps, if any, are being taken when promoting and sharing job opportunities to make sure that they're getting to people with disabilities? And what networks are those being distributed on? And are those networks accessible? Are you sharing information in accessible ways so that you're ensuring that people with disabilities get exposure to those opportunities to even apply? And I'm kind of specifically talking about utilizing cultural brokers and trusted community partners and networks who we know serve people with disabilities. And are we utilizing those networks efficiently to make sure that the opportunities are getting to people with disabilities? Because that in itself is a way of kind of starting to destigmatize disability, because as a person with a disability, if you're going directly to disability-led organizations to share job offerings, we know that you're looking for people with lived experience, and that helps us go prepared to the interview, knowing that we don't have to hide that we have a disability. So I was curious if that's happening in any capacity, or if you think that would be kind of a benefit to get people with disabilities to apply more and kind of feel more comfortable and in a safer environment from the get-go during the hiring practice.
Sure. If it's okay if I start, Barrick.
Absolutely.
I'll say that we currently have 2 job openings that's happening this week. One because Miss Christina decided to leave us, and it's on the hiring manager. So in this case, me, to decide where to send those. They send them to the sort of the normal places that the city always shares, and so I think that. Could it be better and more efficient? And could we have our HR team understand all the places? For sure. I'm sending them to independent living centers, Disability Law Colorado, CCD. I'm sending them to those places and say, share them with your networks. We were just at Atlantis this morning for a field trip. And I said, please send this out. So I guess the answer is sort of a yes and. Yes, we are working on it, and there's definitely more that we can do and learn. And so if you have recommendations of places to share it, please tell me. I'm not exaggerating. I have 2, the ADA coordinator and the ADA program access manager. I am looking to hire by June.
Christina, since you created one of these vacancies, I feel obligated to call on you.
Yeah,
You
no
have
problem,
thoughts
child.
on that
Yeah.
question of the posting and making sure this is getting into networks of people with that lived experience.
Absolutely. I mean, echoing off of Allison, it really does come down to who's in the position, right? Like Allison is a disability justice lawyer. She's going to send it out to the disability community because that's her network. But I think it also comes down to like offices like Allison get to work with the city of Denver. Like Allison works with OHR, the Office of Human Resources, and can be that resource to HR folks who are sending out other job applications outside of the disability rights world and say like, hey, we got to, make sure that this is getting to where it needs to be. I can also say in my past life as a disability social worker, I was on hiring lists for everything from supermarkets to hospitals to local governments to be like, hey, like, here's a job application. And my job was I worked with adults with autism who were on the hunt for employment and independent living and working in that space. And I just made sure that I, as a case manager, was like up to speed on like all these different lists. And I would cold call people, which has systemic issues in and of itself. We should not be, putting that on our underpaid caseworkers to go out and fight for that work. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question at all, Craig. But
Thank
but
you.
I will say that I found my current position with CDHS from the disability community. I went on LinkedIn. A lot of the connections I have on LinkedIn are disability advocates, and people were like, the DD Council is hiring. And there were like 7 posts of the same position. And I was like, oh, I should apply for that. Yeah.
I'm not going to in any way speak for this subcommittee. I'm hearing what should probably be some conversations when we get together over the summer and start putting in ideas, because I appreciate the candor that it comes down to the individual. And there's some great things that individuals do. We'll have to talk as a committee if there are some things that we want to either strongly suggest or maybe use a combination of carrots and sticks to ensure take place. Kevin, anything you'd want to add to this conversation of making sure these job announcements get into the right places and all of the places?
I think that Allison and Christina covered it. I mean, I think it is about relationships and understanding where your networks are, making sure that you're connecting with the folks that you want to hire, of course. Since this is recommendations, I guess the only thing I would add is I know that the question was about how do you shop jobs, what networks are you going into, just kind of thinking about how a mind tree of an idea here, how things could go. The only caution I would just add is that I think that the work should be focused on the culture of the organization. I've seen networks pop up and build employment. Not okay. I don't want to use that example because we have an employment first here in Colorado, but there was a separate employment first initiative in Florida where the idea was incredible. We're going to build an application and a network that is just for persons with disabilities. The idea was to recruit employers to come to that website and have them, they could immediately identify candidates with disabilities. With some weird idea, the win-win was you can meet your federal requirements and it's an opportunity for persons with disabilities. But what it ultimately did was it created this segregated website where jobs were advertised and only a handful of jobs, and networks were pushing persons with disabilities to look in this one place. And so these were the opportunities for people with disabilities in this region, and so I think that the real focus needs to be on culture within the organization. And I think that people with disabilities should have the right to employment just like everybody else. I don't even think that it should even be that big of a conversation. It should just be, can the person do the job? Are they qualified with or without an accommodation? How do we make sure they're successful? And I think that's the culture part that we need to reinforce.
Thank you, Kevin. We are going to have to wrap up the panel in just 1 minute. Chanda, I want to bring you back in, and Shannon and Craig, I see hands up. If we don't have public comment, I'm happy to bring you back in if our panelists will stick with us. Chanda, I know you had a question earlier, and I want to make sure you got the answer you were looking for. I think you were probing about what legislation was out there today, and I will frame this with, obviously, we're not here to advocate for or against, but we are here to make sure there's awareness. Did you get the answer you were looking for or the clarity, or do you want to restate your question?
Yeah, this is Chanda. I was just seeking.
Sorry, I thought you said Shannon, so I'm saying that I got my questions answered. Sorry, Chanda. I thought you said Shannon. My bad.
I was just indicating that I wanted to be aware of potentially any legislative initiatives, bill or not, that the panelists might want to share with us. As we know, some systemic change is oftentimes where we make the biggest changes, right? A lot of advocates on this understand that, right? And so we might be aware of them already. If we're not aware of them, I just want to be aware of them so that we as a committee can be very thoughtful about what we will be proposing at the end of all of our work. That was really what I was trying to get to. Did that help?
That did. Thank you, Chanda. And what I'm going to do to both manage time and ensure the comprehensiveness of the answers, Allison, Christina, and Kevin, if there are things that you're aware of at either the municipal or the state level, if you would share those with Carrie and me over the next 12 to 24 hours, we will turn around and make sure we get that out to the whole group. Now to Shannon, and I apologize for that mix up on my part. Shannon, did you have another question for our panelists?
Well, I know that Craig was first. I don't know if you want to take him first or.
Thank you, Shannon. Let me bring Craig in. And while I bring Craig in, a reminder to any member of the public, I have not yet received any requests for public comment, which is why I'm continuing this conversation through the public comment period. If you are a member of the public that would like to address the subcommittee, drop a note in the chat to Carrie Steele or myself, Eric Abramson, and we'll get you in. Until I hear from a member of the public, I'm going to continue this discussion. And Craig, it goes to you.
Hi, this is Craig. Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up to the previous conversation with Kevin's answer, where I definitely agree that it does have to start with the organizations and the culture within. But I do think that because of just the ableist society that we still live in and the stigma that still exists, we still need to be very proactive in making sure information is reaching people with disabilities. And if we skip that step, we're going to remain very siloed off still. So I want to make sure that there's this happy medium where it needs to be happening simultaneously, where we still need to be proactive to make sure information is reaching it to all members of the disability community, because if we're not, a lot of people are going to miss it. And we can have all the culture change that we want internally, but we're still not going to be getting the diversity of talent and thought that we need, and I think we're striving for. So I just wanted to add that note as well, that I think we need to be doing both simultaneously.
Thank you, Craig. And Kevin, did you want to jump in real quick?
I just wanted to say thank you, Craig, for your comment. You're 100% right. I didn't mean it any other way. I totally agree. It's a good point.
Thank you. And Craig, what I will say is we're going to talk in a minute about our plans to start developing ideas and solutions. And I'm going to count on you to hold our feet to the fire and hold us accountable to make sure as we're talking about these solutions, that that's on the table as one of the things that we're talking about in terms of not just hoping for, but that we take action to ensure. Shannon, to you with a last question for our panel, and then I'm going to have some updates for the group.
Sure, definitely my last question. So I know that the community of disabled or people with a disability, it's hard because when we talk about this, it's kind of putting the chicken, is the chicken first? Is the egg first? Like what comes first? So we have people with disabilities who want to work. They have no experience. To get experience, they have to work. There's something that's missing in that process. So I'm hoping that maybe through internships or something we could, if there was something set up to get people who have a disability a chance to get some of that work experience, then they have a much better chance of getting an actual job because they have some of that experience.
Panelists, who wants to volunteer to come off mute before you get voluntold?
I really hate to just jump in because I'm sure Christina probably has more on this as well as Allison. I would just say I would support that coming out of this committee 100%. The only thing I would add is just the caution on the internship is we don't want people to be stuck in internships for the rest of their life. You know, we want people to have careers, you know, and have work. So I'm sure that this committee will approach that subject with caution, but I think that any recommendation for the development of any type of education, training, and employment program is definitely a positive step.
Christina, you got name checked, which means you're coming in next, and then Allison will clean up.
Thanks, Kevin. No, echo what Kevin said. Absolutely. I think be bold with it. I think that there's a lot of open doors here that you all get to push wider. Like, that's awesome. I really support that. Echoing what Kevin said, though, like, as long as there's sustainable growth out of an internship, stellar. And if there's any assistance I can do from the CDHS, you give me a call.
Thank you, Christina. Allison, final thoughts on this or on our overall discussion?
Sure. And I would say internships are great, making sure they're paid, but also encouraging people with disabilities to get involved in other ways. You know, Shannon, you know about our commissions. In Denver, we have a commission for people with disabilities. Getting involved in boards, getting some other experience like that, I think can really also help your resume and help you get experience and exposure and make relationships with people in the community. So that's what I would say on that question. And that's why I know Shannon, actually, and because he comes to town hall meetings and he does things, and so we see him, we know him, and I think that that's fantastic. Overall, I would say thank you all for having me here today. It's been fantastic. There's, I'm a proud employee of Denver, and I think there's many things we're doing right. And I think there's always more we can do. That's why I do look for not just compliance, but and beyond. And always have my door open. If there are things that you say, you think Denver's doing this right? Are you kidding? And you have some feedback, please let me know. And if I'm in all seriousness, am looking to publish these 2 job postings. And if there's a place that you think that I can or should, please let me know, because I want to do that as well. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Allison. Christina, and then Kevin. Final thoughts for this group, or suggestions as we start shifting from brainstorming and understanding challenges to developing solutions. Anything you'd want to leave us with to think about, or to make sure we act on?
Yeah, I think my parting soapbox is one that I stand on quite a bit, especially working with the Developmental Disabilities Council now, which is just to make sure that our language is always accessible. That is something, a barrier that I get very frustrated with working in government land, and especially in policy of, bureaucratic steps can be really inaccessible to understand, and the language that we use can be a barrier right off the bat. So just make sure you're using plain language in any kind of job postings you are posting, because that immediately can eliminate so much of your potential workforce, and it drives me up a wall. So, yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Kevin, your final words of wisdom, guidance, or encouragement to this group.
Oh, well, I just want to thank you all for having me here today. It was good to see you all. I know about half the group here. Allison, it was good to see you too. And Christina, it's nice to meet you. Welcome to the state. Look forward to working with you. For this group, I would say that, essentially, to affect change, you have to identify what the sustainable wins are, the things that we can make a difference in today, our corners of the world, and how can we impact policy change that is sustainable. And so to understand what's sustainable, we have to understand where all of our problems are. And so I would just reinforce what a lot of folks have said. And I've listened to some of the other meetings as well, and particularly what Rob said today about ADA coordinators and self-evaluations. I think that's incredibly important. I think that you need to have infrastructure. You need to have the ability to respond to new areas of new barriers, new challenges. And I think as the digital accessibility is, we've learned, hey, we have a lot of work to do, and we need to be able to leverage our workforce. But to do that, we need to understand where all the barriers are. And so my guidance and thank you all for everything you do and your service to the state. I am, again, so humbled to be here, but I would just encourage you all to think about policy and infrastructure in your recommendations, because I think that's where real change happens, in monitoring that change.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you, all of our panelists. This is how we are going to be able to make the most informed decisions, is by bringing in all of these different perspectives and expertise. So we greatly appreciate you joining us today. Members of the subcommittee, I've got a few administrative notes, so don't hang up just yet, because one of them is going to be homework and one of them's going to be relating to some scheduling. Before I give that, I also want to thank everyone else who continues to join these calls from the public and from across the state. We have a number of people from the Civil Rights Division who have joined. I won't call people out by name since they didn't self-identify, but I saw people from CASA. I saw people from the Division of Human Resources. I see people from the business community. So this work is gaining more and more interest, and you as committee members are the reasons for that, because you continue to share this important work. On the note of the important work, a couple of things that we're going to follow up with all of you on. Number one, we know summer is coming, and some folks have asked about summer hours for these meetings. We're happy to keep them at the current time. Some folks have asked if they could get their afternoons a little more free to play with their kids or to get out into the outdoors. We will work with all of you around what scheduling works best for you. So we'll follow up with you about that. On the note of meetings, though, I want to be very transparent. I do believe that this summer, at least once or twice, we're going to need to get together more than once in a month. My ideal would be if we could get together sometime in the month of July to do a deep dive for probably anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. That said, I know that's a huge ask when you all are already volunteering your time. So rather than put anyone on the spot, we're going to reach out to everybody and ask if that would be feasible for you to carve out that kind of time on a day. We're also going to talk to each of the members about whether you'd like to do that in person or in a hybrid format. And we would, of course, work with all of you around what accessibility needs need to be met, as well as just making sure that the overall meeting works with your schedules. But those few things will follow up with you. Hours and time for the meetings over the summer, the fact that we probably will have to squeeze in some extra meetings, and some conversation about whether it's feasible to get together in person or hybrid and really dig into some of these ideas a little more in depth. On that last note of some of the ideas, I started today's conversation by saying this summer we're switching from brainstorming to really starting to develop ideas. Our vision for that is that each meeting will dig deeply into one area of our work. So one of those will focus on running for and serving in elected office. One will focus on a lot of what we talked about today around being employed by the state. One will talk about accessing government services and discussions and so on. What I'd like to ask all of you today, so that we don't lose the great conversation we just had, is if you could carve out 15 minutes between now and the end of Friday before you head into the weekend and write down 2 to 4 ideas you heard today that you think are worth this group exploring when we start to recommend ideas. The plan will be we'll dig deeply into one topic each month. We'll develop your short list of ideas. They may not fully be recommendations yet. They may just be ideas that you're considering. And what we want to do is then socialize those with a much broader group of stakeholders. So that's when we'll start using the Engage Dora platform. So as you develop your short list of ideas you're considering for things like how to remove barriers to running for and serving in office, we want to get those out to as many Coloradans as possible in all of your networks to get their reactions. What are the strengths? What are maybe some of the places we need to improve on them? What are other ideas they have? So that's my homework ask for all of you, is just to give some thought to what were some of the ideas you're walking away with from today's conversation. Put those just in a bullet format and email those over to Carrie and me before you take off for the weekend. We'll also follow up with you about summer meeting schedules. We do have our next meeting scheduled for June 6th. We are not going to change that meeting. So any conversation about alternate times or formats will be for after that. We've got 2 minutes. I'm happy to give them back, but does anyone have any questions before we sign off? I'm not seeing or reading any questions. Rob, I can email the questions out to all of you. I just want to thank again our panelists, and most of all, thank you all who are continuing to donate your time to this subcommittee. We'll follow up by email and we'll see you again on June 6th. Thank you all very much.